Good morning to everyone, or good morning again, and especially warm welcome to Professor Löschel. It's an honor to have you here, Andreas. I am sincerely grateful for you accepting to be with us today. Andreas, you are very kind for joining us. Thank you. Thank you all for coming to our 8th symposium. The focus of this year's symposium is energy efficiency, economics, and policy. As we say in our booklet, climate change is without doubt one of the main threats faced by present and future generations when trying to achieve sustainable development because of its negative effects on the economy, health, and social welfare. The new social model needs to compel emissions reduction and achieve sustainable economic growth. Within this context, energy efficiency can be seen as one of the main tools for reaching this target. Although energy efficiency has always been an important component in European policy, in recent years, it has received a significant boost with the setting of quantitative targets to increase energy efficiency, making it a priority in Europe's energy strategy with the Energy Efficiency Directive and the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive. Specifically, European members are planning how to achieve at least 32.5% improvement in energy efficiency by 2030. Energy efficiency will play a central role in decarbonizing industrial processes, but much of the reduced energy demand will occur in buildings in both the residential and service sectors thanks to a robust innovation framework and the digitalization process. However, according to the recent publication of the European Environment Agency, Trends and Projections in Europe 2019, the trends in energy consumption observed by recent years put the European Union at risk of missing its energy efficiency target. In this sense, achieving an ambitious energy efficiency objectives requires the member states adopt new policies and implement additional measures to remove barriers in order to facilitate investment in energy efficiency. This leads us to ask, for instance, what role does energy efficiency play in Europe's policy to tackle climate change? Why aren't firms and consumers investing enough in energy efficiency? Or which measures might favor energy efficiency practices? Today, our 8th symposium will try to debate and answer some of the questions about the role played by energy efficiency now and in the future for the energy sector, its implications and challenges from a new energy policy approach. These questions will be analyzed by contributors. The strict selection of papers presents us innovative ideas on these topics. The debate will be addressed by our illustrious chairs, who will guide the discussion. Thank you very much for joining us again. The first table is focused on energy efficiency and consumption. The significant topic will be approached by Pablo del Rio from the Spanish National Research Council, Elisa Trujillo Baute from the University of Barcelona and the Chair of Energy Sustainability and IEB, Mathieu Glachan from Mindtech and CERN, and lastly by Pier Paolo Parrotta from IECEG School of Management. Monica Giulietti, professor of Loughborough University, chairs this table. Global energy efficiency trends is the topic of the second table. The papers will analyze models of consumption and the objective of energy efficiency for the transition to a low-carbon economy. Professor Christopher Beringer from the University of Aldeburgh, Marina Economidou from the Joint Research Center, and Louis Gaëtan Durodet from l'École de Pont, Paris Tech, and CIREC will present and debate these papers. The table is chaired by Andreas Löschel, professor at Münster University. And the first table deals with an analysis of the type of energy policy required to achieve greater energy efficiency. Analyzing energy policies is chaired by Tora Hamas from the Copenhagen School of Energy Infrastructure. Donatella Bayardi from the University of Parma, José García Quevedo from the University of Barcelona, Chair of Energy Sustainability and IEB, and Helen Schweiger from the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development will tackle these issues. Finally, I would like to express my gratitude to keynote speakers, Professors Andreas Löschel and Ulrich Wagner, who will be in charge of the closing session. It's a great pleasure for me to present a giant in energy and environment economics, Professor Andreas Löschel. He holds the chair for energy and resource economics at the University of Münster, as is director of the Center of Applied Economic Research Münster since 2014. Since 2011, he has chaired of Energy Expert Commission of the German government to monitor energy transformation. And since 2017, he directs the Virtual Institute in Smart Energy North Rhine-Westphalia. He is a lead author of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change for the 5th and 6th Assessment Report. He is also a member of the National Academy of Science and Technology, a member of the Council of the IW of Berlin. Visiting chair professor at the University of International Business and Economics in Beijing, and from 2019, an associate researcher of the Chair of Sustainability and IEB of Barcelona University. He was visiting professor at MIT, Stanford University, Australian National University, Tsinghua University of Beijing, and Oxford University, to name a few. His research interests are in applied microeconomics, energy economics, and economics of climate change. Andreas Löschel advised the European Commission, the European Parliament, the OECD, the World Bank, and national ministers in Germany, Switzerland, and the UK on environmental, energy, and climate change issues. He has published more than 158 papers and articles in the top journals as Energy Economic, Ecological Economics, European Economic Review, Journal of Public Economics, and many others. And he has contributed to 18 books. He is on the editorial boards of Climate Policy, the Energy Journal, and Economic e-Journal. With his contribution, Professor Löschel has more than 5,000 citations and has become a reference in the area of energy economics and environmental economics, being among the top 5% of authors in the world, in the number of works, distinct works, citations, age index, and abstract views. The Handelsblatt ranking of German economists lists him among the top 100 in 2017. In the ranking of economists of the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, he was several times among the 50 most influential economists in Germany. As can be noted my previous words, Professor Löschel has an extensive and prestigious CV and is, of course, one of the most distinguished researchers in the field worldwide. Andreas, it's an honor and a pleasure to welcome you as keynote speaker in this symposium. The floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Maite, for this very nice welcome. I think you know my CV better than I do, so excellent. When I was asked to talk today here in the symposium, I was thinking about the general theme now of this symposium, which is energy efficiency. If you ask economists about energy efficiency, they will usually come up with a simple answer, which is increase energy prices to foster energy efficiency. So therefore, I would like to talk about the recent activities of the German government to implement carbon prices, especially in the sectors outside the ETS. But we as well know from the German example that just looking at increased efficiency or promoting renewables is not enough to reduce emissions, but it's as well really about how to drive out fossil energy out of the energy system. So the second theme I want to report on is the coal phase out, which is another major energy-related initiative in Germany that was recently enacted. I think both of these topics are relevant as well on the European scale because we will see that, and I will argue that the carbon pricing initiative of the German government will play an important role as well in the future of the Green New Deal, being relevant as well for many other economies potentially in Europe, thinking about the extension of the European emissions trading system. And I hope that the example of the coal phase out as well shows some of the implementation challenges other governments are facing with high shares of coal when getting serious about reducing coal, and it reiterates a bit the economic advice on how to move towards a more sustainable energy system, which is relying more on economic instruments and less on governmentally regulated direct interventions. So this is the lessons learned from these two experiences. When Joe Kaeser, the CEO of the German industrial giant Siemens, was asked in 2015 about some insights about energy policies, he said at a conference, anyone that has to take over responsibility for energy policy in a country has it quite easy. Just do the opposite of what Germany is doing. So if you follow the advice of Joe Kaeser, you will probably consider again these two policy examples I'm going to show you. On the other hand, I would like to convince you that at least the direction is a good direction to take, even though implementation is probably difficult. I want to as well direct you, Maite mentioned already that I'm chairing the Energy Expert Committee of the German government. We are publishing a yearly report on the energy transition in Germany. It's me, it's here. Where do I have to point this to? Okay, okay.
It's on? Yes.
Okay.
It was off.
Okay, so here you can find more information if you're interested in this. We are publishing this report annually. We as well, we are doing a more detailed assessment also on energy efficiency improvements in Germany. You can see here a very simple traffic light system where basically all traffic lights that are related to energy efficiency policy in Germany are red. because we are basically missing all our energy efficiency targets. That's true for primary energy, but that's as well true for energy efficiency in the different sectors. I'm as well charged with monitoring the National Action Plan on Energy Efficiency for the German government, and I can assure you we have a large list of measures actually on energy efficiency. We have around 50 measures now of the German government, and if you monitor them, you can find that only a handful of these measures are really effective. And they usually contribute very little to carbon mitigation. So most of these measures are really small-scale measures, with, of course, a lot of additional cost in implementing these measures and as well finding the really effectiveness of these measures. So therefore, I'm going to talk a little bit more about carbon pricing, which provides a more systematic approach to reducing energy use and increasing efficiency. Okay, so why are we doing this? Well, because we want to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, and you can see here that Germany has already gone quite a long way. These are emissions from 1850 to today, and you see the peak of emissions in Germany was, and this is true for many countries, was around 1980. Now and then, since then, emissions have gone down pretty steeply. Nowadays, Germany has reduced its emission by more than 35% compared to 1990. They want to achieve 40% and 55% in 2030. That's all status quo. It's not taken into account the Green New Deal, and I'm going to talk a bit more about this later on, because the Green New Deal is, of course, going to affect as well member state policies in the emissions trading sector, but as well in the other sectors. So based on these assessments, the German government has set up a climate action plan for the different sectors, putting up sectoral targets for the energy sector, for the building sector, for the transport sector and other sectors. Industry, of course, but as well agriculture and so forth. We know that the costs of reducing carbon in these different sectors are heterogeneous. So actually the easiest part is the energy part, and then comes probably building, transport, industry, agriculture, like I showed it on this slide. So it makes a lot of sense to think about decarbonizing energy first. And here in the slide you can see that the German government has tried to differentiate a bit the targets of the energy transition, but not sufficiently from my point of view. So there is still large hopes on reducing emissions in industry. There are large hopes in reducing emissions in the transport sector, which might be much more difficult than anticipated. So this will be a difficult chart, and you can as well see that from now on it requires reducing emissions in many of these big sectors by more than 4% per year. So this is really substantial, and it's really unclear whether we achieve the continuation of these emission reductions in the different sectors. In the past, we have decarbonized much less. It would in fact mean that we have to triple our reduction efforts in the next decade to come. So totally unclear how this can happen, and this is the background for the German government to initiate two big programs. The first is the coal phase-out, because coal is obviously the biggest contribution in the energy sector in Germany, with a very coal-based electricity generation system in Germany, where coal makes up more than 1/3 of electricity generated and a large fraction of the emission. And the second one is carbon pricing in the non-ETS sectors, that is part of industry, but especially transportation and building. So these are the two big initiatives that have been enacted in the last year. And as I said, will I think, dominate the discussion about the energy transition in the time to come. If you think about coal phase out, and I know that's as well a big topic, of course, in Spain, we already had a very substantial coal phase out in Germany, which is the phase out of hard coal mining. German hard coal mining was not competitive in the last 40 years or so, and we've seen a full phase out of hard coal mining in Germany up to or until last year, and actually in 2019 the last coal mine in Germany was closed. I always have to push this one. So if you look at the number of mines that we have and the number of employees we had in Germany, this was really the big challenge. Now in Germany in the 1960s, we had around 500,000 people working in the mining sector. And these numbers were reduced to 0 in 2019. So over 50 years time, we reduced actually the number of miners from 500,000 and more to 0. And you can imagine how big now the pressure and the adjustment actually was. And this coal phase out was done following the social market model of Germany, what we call the Rhenian capitalism, where we try to find solutions in cooperation between firms, companies, and the government to solve these issues. Trade unions supported the hard coal mining phase out, and there was even an own entity, the RAK Foundation, founded in order to ensure the transition of the German coal sector in Germany, and the structural transition was really the core issue of the coal phase out. Mainly, of course, in North Rhine-Westphalia, the place where I'm now teaching, where a lot of the coal mining facility was there. And this is not a trivial task because we know that a lot of these regional economic developments are path dependent. So it's really difficult to change, and they are very place dependent. So it really depends on the specific frameworks of the regions that you are talking about. In the case of North Rhine-Westphalia, for example, they did a lot on spurring inward investments, increasing attraction, working on sectoral diversification with, for example, the tourism sector and other sectors really playing a role. They invest a lot on spin-offs and startups. I mean, you talked about the Virtual Institute Smart Energy that is part of these activities. So trying to bring in new and innovative businesses, often related to energy, to these areas. So these relatively positive experience of the coal phase-out has to be kept in mind when we talk about the second phase-out of coal, which is the phase-out of coal electricity generation. That is much smaller in terms of ambition levels, because in the German generation sector, coal generation and mining, that's open pit mining of lignite, there are about 20,000 people employed. So it's a much smaller sector, directly employed, another 20,000 indirectly employed. So that is obviously less ambitious, but the idea of phasing out coal generation follows the same pattern as the first coal phase-out. So the German government set up a commission in 2018 that was called Commission for Growth, Structural Change and Regional Development. Okay? And you might miss the mentioning of coal, because the aim of the commission was to think about measures to ensure that the climate target in 2030 is reached, and that that coal is ultimately ended in the first half of the 21st century. But from the name you see that again the focus of the commission was on issues of structural change, growth and employment, which played a big role. And actually a lot of the measures that were enacted by the government as a follow-up of the recommendations of the Commission were on structural change issues. In fact, around 40 billion euro on structural support will be directed to the coal areas in Germany, which is especially in the eastern Germany, Lusatia and Saxony-Anhalt, and in the western part of Germany, the Rhenish mining district. So a lot of money given to these regions in order to cope with the foreseen structural change, because the employment, of course, is concentrated in these areas, and especially the east of Germany is a relatively structurally weak region in Germany, so government was very serious about that. So this is the one part of the recommendation. The other one, of course, is related to the coal generation. And here the Commission, they propose to phase out coal by 2038 at the latest, if possible already 2035. So that means a rapid reduction early on in power generation from coal, and then a final phase out of coal in the mid of the 2030s. Okay, if you think about these recommendations, I think it's helpful to look at, let's say, the modeling exercises that we have on the table on the development of the German electricity sector in the 2030s. And what you can see is that due to increases in carbon prices, due to reductions in capacities because power plants reaching their technical lifetimes, there is already a substantial phase out of coal power plants foreseen in the next decade or so. These are here studies from different modeling exercises, but they all show that power generation from coal in the German electricity sector would almost be halved over the next decade, and that is all driven by market forces. There is no regulatory interaction involved in this massive reduction of coal generation and capacities over the next decade. That's mainly driven by policies that are already enacted, like the emissions trading system, together with overcapacities on the European market, and the age structure of the German power plants. So if you keep that in mind, you might not be probably too surprised to see the next picture, which is showing you on the left-hand side in brown the phase-out proposal of the Commission, and in blue I printed a very simple reference, which is 45 years lifetime, which is the historic lifetime of power plants in Germany. We know that for the future, of course, this will not be no longer the reference, so power plants will run shorter, so you should probably move this blue line a little bit more to the left, and what you can see is, well, indeed, the phase-out proposal of the this Commission is more or less just bringing the coal phase-out a few years up front. Probably 5 years from what you would have expected with these market forces. And you can as well see there is one problem left, which are the relatively new coal power plants that have just been built in recent years and are just going to be operational for a long time, and they are as well not going to be phased out with the policy instruments that we have at hand at the moment. So then, of course, there was a lot of discussion how we should enact these pathways that I just showed you. And the economists have argued that the negotiated phase-out is a bad idea, because this is going to lead to inefficiencies from an economic perspective, and we should try to rely more on a phase out that is market driven by higher prices, either in the ETS or by national prices, like we know from the UK, the carbon floor price, that is very effective in driving out coal power plants. As I will show you, the German government has not followed this advice, but has actually started to negotiate bilaterally with lignite power plants on compensation schedules for closing the companies, and they are going to set up now for the hard coal power plants an auctioning system where they are auctioning closure of hard coal power plants over the next 10 decades to achieve the emission reduction. There are many problems with these type of approaches, not only inefficiencies, as I will show you, but of course there's as well the problem that we have a lot of new construction of gas-fired power plants. I will show you later. That's going to be necessary, and of course the regulated phase out is going to lead to an improvement, not only of these gas power plants, but as well it's as well going to benefit the newer coal power plants. So you will have some type of coal rebound, as we called it, where the newer coal power plants are picking up the generation capacities of the older plants that are phased out. So in terms of carbon mitigation, you should be quite skeptical now of what will be achieved. It's for sure much less than we see from a technical perspective. Plus, of course, we as well have to make sure that these reductions are going to be effective in the system of the EU ETS, because we are going to free up certificates that are going to end up being used somewhere else. This problem might be mitigated a bit by the market stability reserve, because the market stability reserve is going to put away part of these emissions, but in the longer run it's totally unclear what are the real effective reductions going along with this. So there are a lot of arguments why you should work with a minimum price of carbon in order to achieve the coal phase out, and think about minimum price of carbon in the ETS or national price for CO2. And my argument would be that as we are going to see an adjustment as well of the ETS, it could be that the whole coal phase out in Germany would have been implemented anyways with stricter targets in the EU ETS. And then I will show you we are probably even worsening the system than improving it. Okay, so I'm going to jump this slide, and I'm just going to tell you that coal phase out is not going to add a lot on electricity prices. So the electricity price signal on coal phase out will be relatively small, but electricity prices in the German system are going to increase substantially, but for other reasons, and the reasons being carbon, CO2, CO2 prices increasing, natural gas prices increasing, capacity being reduced, nuclear phase out in Germany. So there are many reasons why electricity prices are going to increase. People think by 50% and more over the next decade. But the coal phase out is going to be relatively small, compared to these big effects. And there was a big discussion about the security of supply, which is going to continue as we are phasing out more and more coal, because all studies show that we need for the potential problem of what we call Dunkelflaute, the dark lull, we need a lot of new investments in gas power plants in order to make here secured electricity available in the German market. And there is at the moment not really an idea what are the investment conditions for these new gas power plants because of the actual situation where flexibility in the German market is practically not priced. Okay, so therefore we are going to monitor as well the coal phase out in the next years to come to see whether we are running into security of supply problems in the German market. Okay, so what is the outcome? So what was the decision? Actually, this was the decision was from last week. So this is pretty new, and I'm going to show you here a slide and a comment from a member of the Coal Exit Commission, Felix Mattes, who was, I think, as well in one of the seminars here, and he was frustrated with the implementation, and I share his frustration to some extent because he said it's insufficient from climate perspective. Why? Because in the actual implementation of the plans, the German government has postponed the phase out of individual power plants to the last possible date. And in the end, we know that it's about the cumulative emissions, not the actual emission at a certain point. So that is a problem. He as well states it's unwise from an energy system perspective. Yes, because the negotiated phase out was mainly with the lignite power producers, which are the actually the most damaging from an environmental point of view, and they had much better bargaining power with the German government. Because as well of these employment reasons, so the lignite power plants, they actually ended up being phased out at least here. So you see the brown ones now that are much postponed to the past, while the black one is the hard coal, which will have to be reduced much earlier. And that, of course, doesn't make sense as well if you think about the economic perspective on reducing emissions in the German system. Third, it's not going to be robust regarding state aid. The companies have been given huge amounts of money, more than 600 million euro per gigawatt for the lignite power plants. For plants I showed you are actually net present value negative. I showed you the slide. So giving so much money to these companies will be scrutinized for sure. And fourth, this consensus process I was talking about is seen to be disavowed by the German government. Actually, there was just last week a press conference by 8 members of this coal phase-out committee complaining about the implementation process, and it as well was now framed as an East-West clash because all the power plants that are phased out late are actually East German power plants. So a lot of this regional thinking entered again the discussion. So idea was good, but implementation was very bad, and we see that we are going to face a lot of discussion about the policy as these power plants are going to leave the system over the next 1.5 decades. So that was the one exercise. The other exercise I want to briefly touch is the carbon pricing in the non-ETS sector. So after the coal issue, the German government started to think about what should we do in order to reduce emissions outside the ETS. Okay, my argument was they should not have touched the ETS sectors anyways, but they did, and as you have seen, in an unfavorable way potentially, because giving high compensations to these power plants very late in the process is, of course, as well generating an opportunity cost for the producers to phase out early. So you might even weaken the carbon price signal, because they know they should hang on because they are getting all this compensation if they are reducing very late in the process. So it would have been much better to wait for the Green New Deal to emerge and do that. But that is the state of play here. In the non-ETS sector, there was an interesting development, which I think can be as well interesting for many other countries, which is the introduction of carbon pricing in these sectors. For a long time, the sectors outside the ETS have been governed by other policy packages in the transport sector, mainly the standards for the car or the car fleet regulation in Germany, the efficiency standards for buildings. No, that's all European legislation that was mainly driving the development as well in the German market. Now we are going to see, I think, a substantial change. We are going to see more carbon pricing, and I'm going to show you the proposal, and that is going to influence as well the way we are debating the non-ETS sectors in Europe for sure, because we know about the new commission, and as well they are going to look closely to the German model of pricing emissions outside the industry. I wrote several comments on that, and I was relatively positive about the package that was not shared by all economists in Germany, but compared to what we have before, I think, as I said, it's really a big step forwards, even though I'm going to complain as well a bit about the real implementation of these measures. So we had a lot of discussion, which is familiar to you all if you're economists, about whether we should use taxes or an emissions trading system, and there are always pros and cons for using taxes versus emission trading. With the taxes, you have a certainty about the costs, but you're uncertain about the emission reductions that are delivered by a specific tax. With an emissions trading system, you know about the environmental effectiveness, but it's not clear what is the resulting price in the emissions trading system. And so the question is, what do you favor if you're setting up these policy instruments? And I was asking for a CO2 tax in the short run, and in the long run, an integration of the sectors in the EU emissions trading system. But politically, a tax was not sellable to the German government, because if it's labeled tax, they are not going to agree to it. Then we made a proposal that was actually saying that we are looking for a fixed price emission trading system or fixed price certificate system. So in order to help them overcome, we have to go back 2 slides, I think, to help them to overcome the problems they have with the taxes. And they picked this up, and what we are going to have in the German case is we are going to have a fixed price system for some time that is then evolving into an emissions trading system later on. I think the first part is good. The problem is, as I will show you, it's going to end up in a national emissions trading system, which is bad, I think, because it's going to make a lot of decisions in this emissions trading system, which will make it very difficult to upscale it to the European level. Okay, so we might end up as well here with some path dependencies, which actually make the whole situation worse. But anyway, so when thinking about the level of the prices that are required to achieve the targets, there was a lot of discussion about the emission reduction possibilities, capabilities of these sectors. And I show you here one slide from this evaluation, taking into account different estimations of elasticities in the non-ETS sector. And the bottom line is, well, non-ETS sectors are really difficult to decarbonize, so the prices that you have to hit now are very high in order to achieve the target. So in this example here, we need to reduce our emissions by more than 100 million tons, and the expectations are prices are somewhere between 70 euro and 350 euro, depending on the different numbers that are on the table. And the median estimate is more like 130 euro per ton of carbon in the sectors, compared to 25 in the ETS, or probably 45 in 2030. That's of course already an indication that the reduction schedule I showed you with the different sector is economically problematic, because it's putting a lot of pressure on sectors that are difficult to decarbonize. At least they are difficult to decarbonize by pricing only, and therefore we asked government not only to use prices, but as well use other instruments to bring down mitigation costs in the sectors, such that the prices can actually work on lower levels, which means investment in public transport infrastructure, for example, and all these type of things that will help making switches in behavior easier, and thereby reducing the necessary prices to achieve your targets. So this is the situation in terms of the necessary costs, and this is the implementation in Germany. So we are going to start with a carbon price of 25 euro in 2021, and this is going to increase to 55 euro in the year 2025. And then there will be a corridor, because I told you they want to move then to an emissions trading system for the non-ETS sector, so for heat and transport. For all the emissions that are not covered by the ETS, that will have ceilings and floor prices in the non-ETS part. Okay, so for now, I mean, they have only specified 2026. Between 55 and 65, but what I just told you, of course, indicates that these prices are likely to be higher, or they're always going to hit the ceiling, in which case the tax would be better anyways. So that was the argument. I think that's a very interesting development because that is showing the dedication of the German government to pricing emissions outside the ETS. And this is going to be, of course, as well a role model for further developments of the EU emissions trading system. We have asked for a long time for an extension of the EU emissions trading system to other sectors, and this is going to be, I think, a first implementation of this idea in a very big economy in Europe. Naturally, you would think that the next step is to link somehow this national system with the EU ETS, and then we will see that many of the other member states are potentially following. At the moment, if you look at the climate directive, then for the non-ETS sectors, then you can see that there is already some type of emissions trading implemented, so you can trade emission reductions in the directive between non-ETS sectors in the member states, but it is not formalized in terms of an emission trading system. You can think that this system can evolve either as a non-ETS emissions trading system covering all member states with some type of interface to the ETS sector, or a full integration of the system in the ETS. In any case, it means that we are going to see much more flexibility in achieving the national targets, and that's relevant for the NECPs, so the National Energy and Climate Plans of the member states, because they will have to factor in this higher degree of flexibility in the future. So the NECPs, they will rely, from my perspective at least, on a more flexible system, taking into account emission reductions that are achieved in other member states, in the non-ETS sectors or in the ETS. Okay, so this is something that is, of course, fully not reflected in today's discussions, but that will have to be reflected in the future to come. Okay, so with these two examples, I would like to close the presentation with just a very brief very brief summary. So I think the coal phase out was in principle a good idea because coal is a relatively cheap option to reduce emissions. But the political implementation turns out to be extremely costly. I talked about the structural change payments. I talked about the compensatory payments for the companies. We are now discussing as well, we are also discussing regulation for sheltering industry from increased electricity prices, which I think will be as well very problematic, taking into account that electricity prices are going to increase anyways, independent of the coal phase-out, and we are going to see a lot of lobbying as well around these type of compensatory measures. So this will all be very expensive. In the ETS, that would have been much cheaper. There are already rules now for indirect emissions, now for competitiveness impacts of firms. That's all in. Here we have to develop that on our own, and that will be very costly. The Commission approach seems to be good now in getting this going, but obviously the results are not fully convincing, and I think it's not as well transferable to other regions because the costs that are associated with this approach are simply too high. The problem is the taxpayer was not sitting on these on the table of the Coal Commission. Okay, so they agreed on many things, knowing that in the end somebody else has to pay for it, and that could not be an example for anybody. No, we in Germany probably can pay for it, but it's not really transferable. And the third thing is, well, we really have to think about how we make sure that our reductions are effective. Because this is not secured at the moment, and it's as well not trivial because there are many difficulties in as well calculating what's the right level of reducing emissions certificates to achieve effectiveness of the emission reduction. So this all has to well be thought through. With the carbon pricing, I'm a little bit more enthusiastic because it introduces now really, from my point of view, substantial carbon price in Germany. You have seen the schedule, 55, 65 euro. That's a lot, okay? And you can calculate, of course, what that means. That means, for example, for our for diesel and gasoline, now that means around 20 cents increases in gasoline prices over a period of 5 years. So this is, I think, a lot, no? And we'll see how this is going to play out in the long run. I also talked a bit about the long-term perspective and the path dependencies, because you're again fixing a system that is very domestic in small scale, and it would have been better to work more on the European implementation, and I think there is still some room for that, and we should push for it to find really European solutions for these things and not national solutions, because they are going to be inefficient. But in any case, it's going to push for more price-based policies on the European scale as well. With this example in mind. And we'll see that the Green New Deal, of course, is going to pick up a lot of these things. We are going to see higher carbon prices as an implementation of the Green New Deal proceeds. Then we are going to talk more about border carbon adjustment and these type of things in the future to come. But in the German case, we are now refocusing at the moment on renewable policies, because we were now dealing a lot with coal carbon pricing, but we see that we are not achieving our renewable targets in the long term as well. Mainly because of fierce resistance on the ground in Germany against mainly new windmills. Okay, so green deployment of windmills in Germany stopped last year, basically. 1,000 megawatts of new windmills in Germany. So this is practically stopping. In the south, in Bavaria, 2 windmills last year. So a lot of resistance on the ground, which explains, of course, that we are moving in Germany more to offshore. Which as well explains why we have to think better about energy efficiency, because we are not going to get the quantities of renewable electricity that we have foreseen in our transformation packages, especially if we take into account, and that's my last point, that we put a lot of hope on sector coupling. So the German, if you look at the German transformation, you see sector coupling with electricity plays a crucial role. We want to move to electric vehicles. We want to move to heat pumps. No, so that means we will need a lot of electricity, even with better efficiency. Very likely, no, our electricity demand is going to increase as well in the next years, which means we will need a lot of renewables. And if we don't get them, which I think is probably going to be the case, then we have to think about other options. And the other options is importing either electricity, but more likely importing synthetic fuels in one way or the other to the German energy market. That's green gas, that's going to be then produced somewhere else. Yesterday evening, I talked about the new hydrogen strategy of the German government. There you see that a lot of the green hydrogen should come from North Africa, which then has to be transported somehow to Germany. And they even mention the Mediterranean gas pipelines again. So we are going to see a reshuffling here as well, and a bigger role on infrastructure, bringing hydrogen to the system, and a bigger role on strategic import activities of synthetic fuels in the long run. Okay, thanks a lot.